next presenter is Arnie Lerner. Arnie is certified by the Division of State Architect as a Certified Access Specialist and is a member of Education and Outreach Committee of the California Commission on Disability Access and currently serves on the San Francisco Access Appeals Commission. He has worked in both the private and public sectors, including the Board of Directors of the San Francisco AIA and San Francisco Heritage, where he also served as staff architect in the 1980s. Arnie?
Good afternoon, everybody. In terms of talking about universal design, I approach universal design as designing with dignity. In other words, everyone uses the same entrance without any kind of special attention or means applied. And it was the basic concept for our project on Alcatraz Island, providing access to the main cell house. As you know, Alcatraz Island started as a military fortress in 1848 and then became an Army disciplinary barracks shortly thereafter. This is a picture of the main cell house in 1914. The Bureau of Prisons took over the island in 1934 to house America's most notorious criminals. It's not often I get to do a presentation with Al Capone as one of my presenters. In 1962, U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy signed an order to close the prison due to its expensive upkeep and its prime location in the bay. All of the energy and all of the waste and everything had to be shipped back and forth to the island, very expensive for the upkeep. In 1972, Alcatraz became a national recreation area, and in 1986, a national landmark, and was taken over by the Park Service. In 1997, the Park Service initiated a barrier removal program to try and provide access to the main entrance of the cell house, which is in that little red circle. Up to then, there was a ramp on the side that went to a back door that got people in who had mobility problems. The access to the main plaza and to the cell house were through stairs and steps that varying rise and run. There was a very thin and kind of broken walkway that went around the green space to the main plaza, and from the main plaza to the entrance, which had an 8-inch step. Working with the Park Service and the Conservancy and the Blue and Gold Fleet, which provided access to the island for tourists and had an obligation to provide maintenance to the island. A design that included new steps on the left-hand side with the appropriate handrails, a redesign of the walkway surrounding the grass area up to the main plaza, and a entrance which had a ramp on either side of a level landing with steps, which provided sort of unequal access to the cell house. Able-bodied visitors could use the steps, whereas people with mobility impairments had to use the ramps. So we looked at and did show this is an elevation showing the handrails and steps, and it quite obviously wasn't a universal design in that those that couldn't use the steps had to use the ramp, and to us signaled a loss of dignity. So we came up with a different design that would provide a fan shape to the design that had a 1 in 24 slope, a very level sort of sidewalk, so everyone could access a level landing area. And we chose a fan design to distinguish this new addition from the rectangular design of the paving. We did provide for reversibility. We had to provide a slip sheet underneath the new concrete so that in the event that no longer wanted to provide access to the entrance, we could remove the new concrete and the old concrete with all of its cracks and wear would still be there. Part of the design was to, while we had a fan design of the access to the entrance, we scored the concrete in the same rectangular pattern of the existing concrete, so that over time, as the new concrete aged and it got darker with use, it would blend in to the existing concrete color and texture. And yet, if you look closely, you would see that something new had been installed. This is a view from the top of the lighthouse that looks down on the project, which you can see the steps and the walkway around. There was a time capsule actually right where that walkway makes kind of a 60-degree turn that was put there during the Indian occupation that we had to be very careful about going around. So you can see the rectangular grid in the concrete. It blends in with the older concrete, and eventually you really won't be able to distinguish it. And now it provides universal access to the entrance. Nobody really notices any difference. I've seen people just standing there talking, not really realizing they were on a modified walkway to get to the entrance. And that's the project. And one other thing that I might add is that California in 1966 gave birth to the independent living movement 2 years before Massachusetts.
Hey, Trista, I'm not sure if you have yourself unmuted yet, so press *6 on your phone.
Yeah.
Oh, there you
Can you hear me now?
You're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Gary Cole is the next presenter, and he's an architect, project manager, and senior associate with Architectural Resources Group, a firm with a practice focused on historic preservation in design, planning, and conservation. He's a graduate of the University of Colorado and has practiced architecture in his native Colorado and California. Now based in San Francisco, he has over 20 years of experience on preservation and rehabilitation projects in California, working on buildings ranging in style and construction from Spanish colonial adobes through mid-century modern. Beyond CPF award-winning project presented today, notable past projects include the base isolation, seismic strengthening and rehabilitation of Pasadena City Hall, recipient of a National Trust Honor Award, the seismic strengthening and rehabilitation of Mission San Luis Obispo de Tolosa, and the rehabilitation of the modernist visitor center complex at Furnace Creek in Death Valley National Park. Gary?
Hello, everyone. So the case study I'm going to be presenting today is an older project for us. That is the name of the project is San Francisco Theological Seminary. And this is an overview of what's called the upper campus at the seminary. And the project involved rehabilitating the two stone buildings to the left and the right, and then making connections to a third building, the white building behind, that was added to the upper campus in the 1950s. So the two stone buildings are Montgomery and Scott Halls. The San Francisco Theological Seminary started in San Francisco, but it moved to San Anselmo in Marin County when these buildings were finished in 1892. Montgomery Hall, which is the one on the left, was the dormitory building, and Scott Hall was the library and classroom building. The Montgomery Hall was later converted to faculty offices, and Scott Hall remained classrooms, but the library moved to that new building that was built in the 50s. These buildings were abandoned for over a decade after the Loma Prieta earthquake, while the seminary decided whether to retrofit them or not. They weren't red tagged or yellow tagged, so they weren't immediate hazards, but they didn't feel that they would do well in another earthquake, and so they abandoned them. Eventually, ARG was brought in to do a feasibility study, and the results of that study, combined with some diligent fundraising on the part of the seminary, allowed the project to go forward. So just a little bit about the existing conditions on the building exteriors. They were in pretty poor condition. When we started, there was a lot of deferred or no maintenance during the time that they were abandoned. The roofs were leaking. They had the original slate roofs on them. So they were close to the end of their useful life anyway, in many cases, and were leaking quite badly. Water was coming through the walls, through cracks in the stone walls. A lot of biological growth, overgrown with adjacent planting, and the mortar was in very poor condition. The interiors were also in very poor condition, and there was very little rehab had been done over time, and so basically in terms of access and universal design considerations, the project was starting from basically how the buildings were in the 1890s. So beyond the imperative of structural retrofit and overall rehabilitation, a major project goal was to recreate the upper campus as the major node for the campus overall. At the start of the project, the buildings were basically surrounded by asphalt with no discernible connections between them, and the only accessible feature at all was, I can point to it here, was one handicap parking space symbol outside of Scott, which actually served the adjacent building, Geneva Hall. This is a overall campus map on the left, and so you see there's the three buildings at the top of the hill and then a lower campus loop, and then the upper campus is composed of those three buildings, Montgomery Hall, Scott Hall, and Geneva. The topo shows that Scott and Montgomery are on sort of a bench on the hill, and so they're it's a relatively level location. And then Geneva is further up at the very top of the hill with a kind of a hillside entrance plaza, which is, oops, the arrow is not moving. There it goes. So the hilltop entrance plaza is here with steps down to the space between Scott and Montgomery. But there was always a major entrance at this location, basically at grade with the areas around Scott and Montgomery. So the site plan, of course, the obvious thing was to connect the two entrances, and that's done through, and the arrow is not cooperating. There we go. So connecting the two entrances is done through kind of a central plaza that is at the junction of the steps coming down from the upper part of the hill. Creating a little plaza here, which also serves as a waiting area for passenger loading, unloading at the parking lot. We also eliminated the vehicular loops going around the buildings, which they're still paved for fire department access, but they're provide pedestrian connections to Geneva Hall and to an shaded outdoor seating area behind Montgomery. And in terms of universal design principles, it's really, we it kind of demonstrates equitable use where everybody is using the same paths. It's simple and intuitive. It's an obvious connection between buildings, but also the colored concrete kind of highlights the pedestrian path and kind of minimize, so low physical effort to really minimize grade changes across the pathways connecting elements of the site. So these are just some pictures of the connections. Upper left is entering the parking lot. You see the two buildings, Scott and Montgomery. Upper right is the path leading from Scott toward Montgomery. Lower left is the path looking back at Scott, and a little detail at the corner around the front of Montgomery. And so the upper left is just the little plaza space in the middle. Upper right is the front of Montgomery, and lower right is the fire lane and pedestrian path behind Montgomery, and then there's a little thumbnail looking back at Geneva. So there's a subsequent webinar on CHBC, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the CHBC and universal access, the kind of the sections that might overlap. As a private project on a qualified historic building located in California, the California Historical Building Code set the parameters for allowable alternatives for access. And I would say that this project took advantage of the alternative entry section, and under the CHBC that is allowed to be in an alternate location up to 200 feet away. But we were mindful of the universal access or universal design principle of equitable use. And if you, the guideline is to make the means of use identical whenever possible and equivalent when not. So our goal in this project was make it as equivalent as possible. And then the other section is that has some overlap are stairs, railings, and guardrails. And so under the CHBC, you can leave them even if they're at variance with current code if it's determined by the enforcement agency not to constitute a distinct hazard. But of course, in terms of universal design, you want your standard to be a little higher than that. You really want it to be as equitable for a broad range of users as possible, and require low physical effort, be comfortable to use. So it's not just minimum safety that you look at, but try and make it more usable for the broadest range of people. So starting with Montgomery Hall, obviously the challenge is that the first floor is half level up and the basement's half level down, so you have no entrance at grade. And then looking in plan, it's a Victorian structure and it was kind of in a grand style, so the corridors are nice and wide, door widths are generally very generous, so once you're in the building, in the circulation space, it's not a problem. And there was an elevator actually connecting the floors in the building, but the issue was getting into the building and then the core. And so there were a couple steps up the entry and then a half flight of steps to the first floor, a very narrow corridor. Try and get the arrow working. A very narrow corridor leading back to the restrooms, and the restrooms were not accessible at all. So in this case, we did create an alternate entry, but it's immediately adjacent to the primary entry, and it works by having a lobby and then a double-sided elevator. Then we did open up the pathway to the restroom and create accessible restrooms on each floor. And again, it's kind of equitable use, identical when possible, equivalent when not in terms of the entry, and then really be mindful of size and space for approach and use throughout the building. So this sections kind of show the historic entry and then the solution with the vestibule and the elevator connecting all floors. And some pictures of the entry. I would say that we added another kind of additional feature that we did was, it's hard to tell in the photographs, but there's a power door operator. And they had one student who used a scooter to get around, so electrified scooter. And so we worked with her and ensured that we had extra space around the entrances to get into the elevator vestibules. But it still wasn't that easy. And then we just added the door operators. And actually we've done that on many projects since. This is probably the first one where we did it where it wasn't trying to make up for some, as an alternative under the CHBC, trying to make up for some deficiency. And this, so we did we added railings and added additional guardrails. So the situation at Scott, moving on to Scott, the situation is very similar. The main level is above grade. Here there are just 2 levels to connect. The basement is just mechanical and storage. Again, the issues are at the core because the main corridor is very generous and door widths are fine. So once you get to here, it's easy to get to the primary spaces on the level. So the challenges are really the entrance, again, a narrow corridor leading to the restrooms, and then inaccessible restrooms. It's just 2 very small single occupancy restrooms for the entire building. And the solution of this building was similar as well. Alternate entrance, very close to the main entrance, vestibule, double-sided elevator. Opening up the corridor to get to new restrooms that were created in this backspace on each floor, new accessible restrooms. And then just showing the second floor, the old library space was converted into a student center, and then classrooms, and again, accessible restrooms. So sections showing the historic entry and then the adjacent entry with the double-sided elevator and access to the 2 floors. And pictures of that. Here, this operator is even more useful because it's actually away from the building wall. So it's on your path of travel to the door, so it's very easy to operate. Here there was a railing added on the much higher railing added on one side of the stair. And then just talking about a few of the other spaces in the building. So these are all in Scott, actually. So the 2 photos on the left are the main classroom on the first floor, and the furniture is can be set up in different configurations. And I would say that so this project is a few years ago, and the AV setup was relatively simple, but that's actually worked out quite well for them because with the advances in technology and flat screen monitors, they actually do a lot of their video teleconferencing and distance learning through cart-based AV systems, which are very flexible for them, and they can move them around as the furniture changes, and they can also take them to the other classrooms on when as needed. Student center is the space on on the middle on the bottom row. Again, generous space, accommodates a lot of different furniture arrangements, a lot of different functions. And then samples of the classrooms. There's 2 classrooms on each floor. On the first floor, the historic pocket doors were still in place, and so it was decided to leave those so they can be opened and the rooms can be used together, or they can be closed and they can be used separately. But the wood doors did not provide enough acoustic separation for the classrooms to be independently used at the same time, and so we did a second acoustic pocket door behind it that can be closed to provide more separation. And then on the upper level, the pocket doors were not existing anymore, and so we did an operable partition on that floor. And I think the universal design principles that we most applied to the design of this would be the equitable use, the flexibility in use, and so very flexible spaces, and again, just being very mindful of the size and space for approach and use of elements throughout the building. So now the site is well connected, and it's possible to get everyone to get throughout the buildings equally. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, this is John. I just wanted to open it up to questions for everybody, and we have plenty of time. We have about 15 minutes, maybe a bit more for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat box, or if you'd really like and you're on the phone, just press *6 on the phone and speak up with your question. To get it started while we're waiting for people to type in their questions, I think I'll start with one myself, and I was going to ask, this one is particularly for Emmanuel, regarding, you mentioned a couple times the lighting and how you used lighting to provide access or to help in wayfinding, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yes. Entering the building and taking the ramp to the left, it was a very long corridor towards the elevator, which is the only vertical circulation, accessible vertical circulation to all the levels. Lighting along the corridor was very well organized, not only for the exhibit spaces, panels along the corridor, but also there was it was used for wayfinding, because the lighting at the end of the corridor identifying the elevator was completely different from the rest of the corridor. So people getting to that corridor would see the light, this different, which is a more yellow than the white light through the corridor, and that would identify as the way going up. The bathrooms all had the same color lighting. There was a recessed wall fixture adjacent to all the doors to the bathrooms on the first floor. So folks, the multi-purpose room could have between 30 people and 120 people, depending on the events. And when you have 120 people living in that room, trying to find the 3 bathrooms, or actually the 3 bathrooms available on that floor, can be troublesome. So they all had the same element of lighting in the right place, giving consistency, so people would find those spaces. Same thing on the upstairs in the studios. We had to be very careful determining circulation. And you're now in a circulation public space, so it had a different type of lighting. Now we're stepping into a studio, a private space. You have a different set of lighting with different lighting levels and different colors and all that. So circulation, navigation was clearly separated or distinguished through lighting.
Okay, and maybe a bit of a follow-up question. Was this the case with this project, and did you have to take special measure to consider any changes to the interior of the structure?
The simple answer is no. The Massachusetts Historic Commission, which is the state historic commission, has no jurisdiction inside buildings. So it's only were preoccupied with the facades and you know, perhaps the recessed entry, where I believe the recess, you know, 5 feet into the building under the archway was also still considered the exterior of the building because of the building facade and the brownstone and the granite facade and the brick. So that was still part of the exterior. Anything on the exterior had to have a bronze finish. So all the light hangers that you saw on the facade had to be bronze finishes. All the hinges and hardware for the historic wood doors that we replicated had to be bronze finish. The moment we step into the building beyond the wood doors and beyond the glass, everything is contemporary. We do not have to comply with any historic requirements by the Massachusetts Historic Commission, and but you know, on the outside we had to. So also that also included being very careful with the historic windows or historically sensitive windows that we're bringing back. The city architect who designed this building, his name is Arthur Vinal. He has another project here in Boston. It's a water pump station on the outskirts of Boston, and that building still has the original colors of all the details done by that architect. So the Historic Commission sent us to that building, and we had to basically mimic the green color, which is the original color of the windows and the wood transom and all that. So the simple answer is yes, we had to comply with historic preservation requirements for the exterior, but not for the interior. And that was a moot point anyway, because in the 70s, the interior was completely, the details are completely eliminated, unfortunately.
Okay, and I'll present the next question that was typed into the chat box. Chris is asking if Arnie elaborate on his negotiations with the National Park Service in order to accomplish the grading.
Okay, I did want to say one thing about lighting. There's a conflict between green building and accessibility when you really look closely at lighting. The Lighthouse for the Blind here in San Francisco, designing new headquarters that they want to be LEED certified, and they found that the lighting levels required for green building were too low for their staff and their customers and their visitors who require a much higher lighting level. And it's something that future codes will need to address, and I don't think a lot of people are really aware of this difference between wanting very high light levels for those who have sight impairments and very low light levels for those wanting to have a green building. As far as the negotiations with the Park Service to accomplish the grading, well, we just presented a different design and tried and convinced them that providing ramps and steps and so on was really not necessary. There was an advocate who had sort of started the whole process of barrier removal, Richard Scaff, who was talking to the Park Service about different ways to make the island accessible, and that advocate also went, and that helped to have some support. And I think they just saw the wisdom of trying to have what looked like a barrier-free environment on that plaza, which was really wide open, and was much better than having to have stairs and ramps when you didn't really need it. It didn't take too much convincing.
Okay. It looks like another question for you, Arnie. How did the facility deal with the closed entrance during the construction of the walkway?
We had to build temporary access, temporary ramps with a lot of red tape around it to sort of show people. And this went into the side entrance that had a very poor kind of ramp. So we built out of wood temporary access that was then later taken down out of wood.
Okay. Maybe a question for Gary, actually. I noticed that in both cases, both with Scott and the first case you presented, you used a double-sided elevator to meet that requirement. Were there any alternatives that you were considering or thinking? I mean, I'm sure there were different iterations that you were going through trying to determine how to get access into the building. Were there anything else that was an option?
Well, yeah, of course, the first thing you always look at is trying to make the main door accessible. But the buildings had very little work done to them, actually. I mean, just really cosmetic stuff. And so all the interior features were there, and it was really, and there wasn't a lot of space either outside or inside to make up the kind of height difference that would be required to get in either building through the main entrance. So, I would say relatively quickly we started looking for alternatives. But even when we do alternative entrances, we always try and make the paths of travel as similar as possible. We rarely do anything as far away as the historic building code allows in California.
Great. I will leave it open. Looks like a question is coming in the chat box, so we'll hold off on moving to the evaluations, but I will encourage everybody in the room currently to wait to do an evaluation. It's where we hear your thoughts on our programs and what you'd like to see in the future. So if you don't mind, wait around for the next question, and then we'll close and move over to the evaluation.
I just want to add one thought, that lots of times the accessibility requirements and regulations are very interpretive, and I've always found it very useful to create a focus group of disabled citizens, or at least get an advocate who's disabled to weigh in on the usability of what might not be fully code compliant on your proposals, and involving to some extent, disabled community in validating your design, and you come up with some really great ideas that way too. And California enacted the Unruh Civil Rights Act, which included accessibility in 1959.
Wow.
Take that, Massachusetts.
Another thing you guys beat us.
Sheila, yeah. Sheila had a question. She was asking for any suggestion for evaluating the installation of exterior handrails with the grand staircase in historic buildings. So she said one center handle or handrail to the side. Any other suggestions when it comes to that?
I can talk about that. For the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, that question came up about the grand staircase, and it's also what I'm doing at the Lilienthal House, is that there's a very majestic rail that comes down on one side, and putting an accessible handrail on the other side is what works, what the building department thinks works as well. And so you maintain you don't have handrails on both sides, but you do provide at least an accessible handrail on one side that somebody can hold on to continuously from top to bottom, while maintaining the existing historic banister.
Okay.
All
right.
I'd like to
Yeah.
offer information on that as well. That's a situation. Stairs and handrails. It's a constant struggle here in our area because of historic preservation of the age of our buildings. A few years ago, I had to work on a project on the Old State House here in Boston. It was built in 1773, 303 years old. Building where there's very little you can do to provide an option that is meets the federal and state requirements and is still historically sensitive to the building. So usually providing one handrail is usually for us here is a compromise with the Historic Commission and the Architectural Access Board. But it's a problem that we're case by case we're trying to solve.
Great, thank you. All right, well, it looks like we're just about complete here. The last step is to move over to the evaluation. So give me about 30 seconds to load up the evaluation. And while I'm doing that, wanted to encourage everybody to join our program on next Wednesday, which will look at the CHBC and the ADA. Wayne Donaldson and quite a few other surprise speakers will be presenting. There are quite a few case studies being presented. One second here, let me pull up the survey. I also encourage everybody to come to our conference this year. 2016 Annual Historic Preservation Conference is happening this year at the Presidio in San Francisco from April 16th through the 20th. You can find more information on that on our website. We have plenty of programs throughout the year. We have about 24 webinars and 12 workshops throughout the state. So if you're interested in any of these programs, you can also look at our website. The survey is now up on the page. So in order to add your responses, you simply fill out the multiple response options and then scroll back up to the top of the page and click Submit Response. On the right-hand side is where we get your qualitative responses, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on any future programs or additional suggestions you have on our programs. And you can also provide any comments on today's program on the bottom. So thank everybody. I thank all of our speakers for their time, especially Krista, who helped organize this program. And wonderful presentations all around. And please do continue to attend our programs and provide your support to us through your membership. Thanks again for your time, and have a wonderful day, everybody. What I'll do is I'll turn the audio off, but I'm going to leave this window open for about 15 minutes.